live streaming the meeting on NBTC's YouTube channel. Our board administrator has already confirmed that we have an in-person forum. We have two commissioners who have requested to participate electronically. Kanika Gide participating virtually for personal reasons as he is out of state on travel. Zach Trogdon is participating virtually as he lives over 60 miles away in James City County, Virginia. Can I have a motion to approve Mr. Gide and Mr. Trogdon's request to participate? So moved by, I think, Ms. Brisman, seconded by Mr. Commissioner Carantonis. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Any abstentions? Sorry, on that. Okay. Special welcome. I'll say first, last meeting we ran to 9:37. Is my personal goal to see my daughter at 9:20. She is objectively cuter than she was 4 or 5 months ago. So we will encourage discussion, but also try and be efficient. A special welcome to Mary Hines, former CTV member and former NBTC member, and WMATA inspector is Michelle Zamarin, is that right? Zamarin, sorry. Both of you are here. We have a full agenda tonight. I'm proposing we do block votes for our commuter choice VRE action items. Any objections to doing those block votes? Hearing none, we'll move forward. Let's get started. As we do each month, NBTC continues to seek general public comments. If you have any general public comments this month. Okay, moving on to number 2, which is the minutes. Stunningly, I caught a small error in the timing of the closed session return last time and the open session. You can't close the closed session before you close the meeting. And so those 2 times have been slightly adjusted, something like 9:37 and 9:40 or that, but making that part of the motion, I will approve. I think Commissioner Evan just moved approval of the minutes. Is that correct? Is there a second?
Everyone gets us confused all the time, so that's.
Oh, this is Commissioner Sickles.
Yeah.
Get that right. Is there a second?
Second from
This is Mr. Alcorn. Thank you. Any further discussion on the minutes? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
I will try to be a little more disciplined. Can you, Mr. Gide, aye?
Aye. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. And Mr. Trogdon, are you there? Oh, that's right. My mistake. So,
I am here. Yes, sir. Aye.
okay. Any,
Did y'all hear that?
yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Trogdon. We will note as appropriate. And any abstentions on the minutes from last month? Any objections? The minutes passed.
This is Mr. Trogdon. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, yes, we can. Does someone have a text? If he can't hear us, if you can text him, that'd be great. So,
This is Mr. Trogdon. Can y'all hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah.
can you hear us?
Yes.
Thumbs up. There you
Okay. We'll move on to number 3 and, action number 3 is to approve tonight's consent agenda, which includes 2 items. Approve the notice of direct contributions to the individual jurisdictions, which is 3A, and 3B is to accept the NBTC regional bus analysis report. Can I have a motion for those 2 items of the consent agenda? So moved. Thank you, Commissioner Garvey, and seconded by Ms. Bagley. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, so that's right. So we are unanimous and we have approved the consent agenda. So we'll move on now to item number 4. We are honoring former Commonwealth Transportation Board member and former NBTC Commissioner Mary Hines for her years of dedicated service to the region and the Commonwealth. Her tenure on the CTB concluded at the end of June, much as some of us might personally have wanted her to be able to continue, not making a grand policy statement. We have a resolution of commendation for Mary, and I'd like to highlight a few of her accomplishments. Mary Hines dedicated 30 years of work on public policy and transportation issues at the county, regional, and statewide levels during her tenure on the Arlington County Board. On NBTC, where she was appointed to serve on the WMATA Board of Directors and the Virginia Transit Association Board of Directors. She has been on NVTA, Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, and the Commonwealth Transportation Board. In her roles with these regional and statewide bodies, Mary was an advocate for Northern Virginia and public transit interests. And I think we already miss, we will continue to stay in touch, but we miss her as a strong voice on so many issues we care about. Not scared to get into the details, but aware of the big picture. Thank you, Mary, for your service on behalf of NVTC in Northern Virginia as a fellow Arlingtonian. I think I've said before how grateful I am to have you as a mentor. We'll start with, we'll have discussion, but first, can I have a motion to approve a resolution of commendation to the Honorable Mary Hines for her 30 years of dedicated service?
So moved. Second.
We have Senator Evan, seconded by Mr. Karantonis. And now I just want to open the floor to see, and we don't have to have all evening, but let's give a full space. At NVTA, there was effusive praise and certainly full space for anyone who would like to mention. I've kind of pretty succinctly, I don't know that I've had many mentors professionally in life, and you have been one of them, and I've been grateful every step of the way. And so, other comments, and I'll open the floor to see if others have things they want to add. Mr. Karantonis.
So besides seconding and really some word that Mr. Ferranti, Chair Ferranti has proffered here, I want to note that every single day I board Art Bus 77, I have to think who the people who were behind that kind of progress. Mary Hines is definitely one of the leading that happened, and not only for us here in Arlington, but also for the rest of Northern Virginia. I had the opportunity to observe how, I got first elected and already 3.5 years ago, how the CTV was working as people struggling, especially, trying to get be heard. Our funding needs, our priorities, our strategic priorities under a situation that turned adversarial at some point and was unfair to us. So we were extremely lucky to have them all. Not only could you translate us to the CTV, your CTV colleagues, but also translate them to us. It made us a definitely better body. And I think that we are accomplished not a few things because of this amazing financial process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Karantonis. Commissioner Snyder, did I saw your hand up?
Yeah, so, a lot of people had the opportunity to, educate and to inform early on, and always by Mary. The thing that impressed me was as busy as she was, she always had time. Always patiently listening to questions, and I think it's not just me, that everyone who ever dealt with her. She always had time. That's pretty amazing considering all that she accomplished. She also was a major force in shaping the region's transportation and government systems over the years, and always stood for the highest values of public service. So it's been an honor to work with you, Mary, and don't go far because I'll be asking more questions. Thank you.
Just a mile up the road.
Sure, we'll give you a chance to respond, disagree with any of the compliments, I think. But Mr. Smedberg and then Mr. Return. Or whichever, go ahead, Mr. Return.
Yeah, so there's fewer and fewer of us, I guess, that served with you on the commission, but that was a pleasure. But just on behalf of Metro, I really want to thank you because, we particularly several years ago, as you recall, we went through some difficult times, and having such a steadfast, knowledgeable supporter of Metro that really wanted to dive in and understand the details of what was happening and why, and helping us with your colleagues on the CTB was absolutely critical. Obviously, your contributions to Metro go way, way beyond that, including serving on the board. But I just want to recognize that in particular as being so helpful for us. And I've always enjoyed getting to know you, and also your work in the region with George Mason and the Regional Elected Leaders Program, which I think many of them benefit from. So.
Thank you, Mr. Lieutenant.
Yeah, and I'll just pick up. I was gonna say something very similar. We've known each other a while now, and we are one of the few left that actually served with
I
you.
think
You're in the room, and Adam. Well, I remember when I first met you, you were, the Metro meetings were always on this Thursday. And you and others would come into the room 5 minutes before the meeting, looked like you had been thrown out a window. But the work you did there really did help the organization get on a stable foot, and your influence in the region. And as Matt said, I think highlighting the work that maybe people around the table didn't see at the CTB, and the important voice that you had there and the time you served there was so critical for Northern Virginia. We just hope that the new representatives are equally as impressive as you have been over the years. You're definitely going to be missed.
Thank you. So we should give you time for rebuttal. Did you want to say anything?
Well, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here with you again. I think I was here last year at some point, briefly I can't even, oh, well, they were doing something down in Richmond. We talked about it. But I guess I have had a great time. I had a great run. I started on the school board. I went to the county board, then I was on the Metro board. I was here at METC, then I went to META. So I really had my finger in a whole lot of pots and finished up with the 8 years on the CTB. And I have to say to all of you, your staffs are amazing. But what I learned from the people who worked for Arlington County, who worked for Metro, who worked for MBTC and MBTA. I did not start out as a transportation person at all. But I live in Clarendon, and so the need for multimodal was immediately apparent to me as soon as the subway opened a year and a half after I moved into my house. So I've lived this, and it's really important. And you come here every day, every month you come here, but every day to go to your other jobs. And thank you for the work that you keep doing on behalf of our region. I haven't watched the CTB meeting since I left. I can't really bring myself to do it. But here's what I can tell you, and it's not different from what probably I said last year. The new people on the CTB, they don't have connections to Northern Virginia. Most of the people I served with in my 8 years, even if they came from Bristol or from someplace out that was pretty rural, they had lived here, or they had a child who lived here, or they had another person who was important to them who came in and out of Northern Virginia. They came to Northern Virginia to go to shows in DC. They had enough experience of NOVA that they understood some of what we're up against here. That is not so very true of the new members. Not their fault, they just haven't. I haven't been to Bristol but once. And I've lived in Virginia for 46 years. So I feel a little bit like Kamala Harris saying, I've been to Europe. But anyway, my point in saying that to you all is that our region has an obligation to help them understand. You cannot be angry at them for not getting it if you haven't figured out how to talk to them about it. And when I first was on MBTC, long before I did the other things, we used to do a transit tour for the new people on CTB to sort of show them how all these layers fit together and why the layers going through the funnel efficiently on top of each other is really important. And so that's my plea to you. Don't leave those people out there hanging. Reach out, invite them. Bring them up here, show them how it works and why it's important. Because they won't get it otherwise. They really won't get it otherwise. And it's important for the Commonwealth that our system works and that people understand what Northern Virginia delivers for all the people in the county. And it's not just the, you know, here's the benefit of Metro kind of thing. You have to see it, you have to touch it, you have to be. So that being said, I miss all the staff I worked with, all these people sitting behind here, many of you whom I work with, I miss that part of it. But I'm so happy not to be regularly sitting in long meetings that.
Sure.
You know, so I don't miss that part.
Well, thank you. Few things could be greater tribute to the service that you had than to be looking forward to the next thing on behalf of the public that we all aspire to try to serve. So really well said. We will now go to, and I would ask, just knowing how I remember things, I hope, Kate, we can talk about Mary's suggestion and have it as a follow-up to do for multiples of us on the commission.
Matt, did you want a picture?
Yeah, yes, don't worry. We have to vote first,
Oh, you have to.
and then we have to have the long awkward picture. But first, all those in favor of the resolution honoring Mary Hines, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, any abstentions? Mr. Aguirre, do I have an aye? Are you there? I think Mr. Aguirre.
Aye.
Great, thank you. And Mr. Trogdon, if you, okay, that's right, it's not, okay, so now we passed it, we'll do the picture,
You want to do it?
over here. Thank you.
Transportation,
I didn't even call it.
I know.
Right, there you go. Thank you so much. Give her a hand. Thank you so much, Mary. Comments, I think, speak for themselves. We will honor your request to not add another long meeting to your world. We will, and you're welcome to stay as long as you want or get home and all is good. We'll move on to item 5, which is our WMATA board member update or our WMATA discussion. First, we'd like to invite Michelle Zamarin. Oh, I don't know if I got it right. Up to, and Paul, could you introduce Metro's new Inspector General? We'll hear from her.
I'd be happy to. Everyone, welcome Michelle to be with us here this evening. So Ms. Zamarin was a distinguished attorney and federal prosecutor whose career spans over 2 decades. In 2003, she joined the United States Attorney's Office as Assistant U.S. Attorney, where she investigated and prosecuted sex offenses, domestic violence, violent crimes, narcotics trafficking, fraud, and public corruption in both Superior and federal court. Ms. Zamarin leadership roles at the U.S. Attorney's Office have included Deputy Chief of the Fraud and Public Corruption Section, Chief of the Federal Major Crime Section, and Chief of the Capital Seizure, Assault, and Breach Section. Ms. Zamarin, background experience, including serving as a trial attorney at the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, Enforcement Division, clerking on the 6th Circuit Court of Appeals, and practicing law in private practice at Skadden Arps here in DC. She is a graduate of the Boston University School of Law. And Michelle has just dived right in. She has really made meaningful impact in her very short tenure here at WMATA thus far, and really look forward to hearing what Michelle has to say tonight.
It's nice to meet everyone. That's my background on where I work, but something just because of something you mentioned that I think is important to share here is I am a lifelong DMV resident. I'm originally born in Maryland. I've lived there until I went to college and law school. Moved back to DC, where I bought my first condo based on where a metro station was located. In DuPont. I lived there for several years, and my husband had convinced me that his television would not fit in my condo, and so we bought a townhouse, again, based on the metro station in Clarendon. After that, we lived in another house based on being close to Clarendon, and now we're at. So I've lived in Virginia for over 20 years. I've been in DC and I'm obviously from Maryland. So when I did get the call about being the Inspector General for WMATA, I thought it was a very perfect job for me. As you heard from my background, I spent many years in the fraud section. My role there was to work a lot with the IGs in the community, the OIGs in the community, to determine whether we should or should not help them prosecute cases criminally. Part of the thing is since I was both a local prosecutor and then on the federal side, I do more of investigations. I did get to know a lot of people in the area, which has really helped me in the job so far as well. One of the things that I've really tried to do since I started in June was to get to know how our OIG compares to others. Congress has an idea of what we should look like, and I am learning and finding that the IG community is very open to helping each other. So it is a very supportive community that is interested in making us better. With that also, one of the first things I experienced when I got to WMATA was that people have been reaching out to say to me, we want to be here to help. And as I'm sure you know, there's a big question about the independence of my office. And there is clearly some trauma on both my office's side from the people who work for me, but also on the WMATA side, because every person that first meet them says, I really want to be helpful and I don't want to interfere. I'm not trying to interfere with your independence. And that is clearly coming from people being worried that what their offer of help is something other than what it is, which is trying to be welcoming. So I've tried to make sure that on both sides, both on the WMATA side and my side, we start a lot of open discussions. We get the OIG out there in front of the WMATA employees so that they can start to get to know us. Our mission, like most IGs, is of course waste, fraud, and abuse, to seek it out, to do so independently, but I want to make sure that we're doing it objectively and fair. I'm not sure that's something that WMATA has felt has been done in the past. Because I do come from the investigation side, I am used to doing that side. I'm learning the audit side as I go along, but I have seen that the audit side is extremely powerful. It is amazing how you can really lay out a plan. And I was fortunate enough to arrive before our audit plan was finished. We just finished it. It is currently public, which everyone is welcome to read. But I was there in time for the last couple interviews and to actually help with some of the other interviews for people at WMATA to really kind of dig in and say, what is it that we need to look at here? And it's a powerful tool because people have to open themselves up and they have to talk. And it is a public thing that we do. Once we have our report, we file it for everyone to read. So I think that it is something that really helps WMATA, and it's very important to making sure that it functions in a way that benefits everyone. One of the things that I was trying to do is, I think a standard question when people do their audit plan is, what keeps you up at night? We did ask that. We also said, what are you afraid is going to appear on the front page of the Washington Post? But a question that I tried to also ask is, what are you seeing that you can't get fixed yourself? And that question seemed to bring out a little more, dug a little deeper into what people were worried about, because they allowed them to express their frustrations, what they thought should be fixed, that wasn't being fixed. And it did actually help us adjust our plan. I'm looking forward to actually a year from now doing completely my own, since I came in late. But I'm very excited about seeing how the audits go this year, just because it's something that's new to me. And I think it's a very effective tool used right. On the independent side, we did have a resolution last week. I'm not sure if Paul explained to the group.
Not yet, but
So.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the board issued a resolution last week to address some independence questions that have come up. One, it was to recognize a staff notice that we had from the acting IG this past spring, which addressed procurement and HR, so that we are now able to do our own HR, our own hiring, and also to do our own contracting. The other was a staff notice that I did along with the general manager, which is for our budget. And so now we are completely in charge of our budget and I'm learning a lot. So it is now something that I will work very hard on understanding, and I luckily have someone who has taken on that responsibility as well. But that was put in part of the resolution, as well as a few other things. My term was changed slightly and were addressed in the resolution. But I will say, as for the question as to the independence, again, it also goes not just to the employees at WMATA, but the board. And one of the first questions I asked as soon as I got with my people, I did a one-on-one interview or not interview, conversation with every person that works in the Office of Inspector General. Not one of them was short. Every single one lasted anywhere from an hour to 3 hours. And just to hear everyone's thoughts on their experience so far, what they wanted to see the office do, and what their understanding was of why the thought was that we didn't have independence. I didn't get one person that said to me that the board had interfered with us in any way, not one. So if that is something that's been said, it is not felt by my employees. But I think also a lot of the trauma for my employees is just that they keep losing their IDs. So, and they are continuing to work and continuing to do everything that they can do, because it is amazing how much they care. Even though they've been through this, they believe that they're making a difference, which they are, and so that motivates them to continue. They're actually a very talented group of people, which has been nice. The support also, one of the things I had set in motion, even in the interview process, something that I wanted to do was what I describe as a roadshow. I know that everyone at WMATA, when they start, gets introduced to the Office of Inspector General. It's a very short presentation, but then once they start working, they never hear about it again. The other thing is many people at WMATA work there for a very long time. So if they did not start within maybe even the last 5 to 10 years, they may not have had the minimal introduction. So I am going to go out to every group and introduce us, describe the work we do, make sure they know how to get in touch with us, and let them know why it's important that we do, but also to spread the message that our main goal is to help, right? We are not looking for gotcha moments. Since I do come from a criminal background, that is saved for my criminal cases. That's not what we're trying to do here. We are trying to make it better. We want people to be able to come to us. They can come anonymously. They can give us their name and help us. And we still protect who they are, and unless they want us to share who they are, but we will protect people who want theirs. But I want them to be able to do that, to trust us, to know that we're there to help. We're not actually looking to get people fired. We're actually looking to make sure we get the information out to fix problems as soon as possible. And there are, of course, criminals who work in all agencies, people who are trying to defraud all agencies. It's not exclusive to WMATA. It belongs to every government agency. It belongs to every company. And so we are going to look for those people, because that just causes problems for everyone. That creates an environment that makes it difficult for people to work in when they think people are getting away with things, when they think people are stealing, when they think they are committing frauds. So that, of course, is a major priority of mine, particularly in the contracting world, because there are always easy ways to take advantage. From my own experience in the fraud side, I've seen a lot of government contracts where people just get kickbacks, or they slip things in, or they take things off the top. And it's very important to me that we have experienced agents that are able to look at that, because it is a very significant way that WMATA can save money. It can also remove people who are causing problems. The other thing I would say is that we do have our new audit report out, as I said, and we're happy. My audit team is happy to come here and review the audits that we have planned, if you are interested in that. Also, next year, what I would really be interested in is if any of you would like to sit down with us and talk about things you see, audits that you think we could do. Because I do find that not just talking to the board and the senior executive team does not give you enough information. It's really when we started going a little deeper into the levels at WMATA that we could actually see where we needed to look and who we needed to talk to. And I think because people like you observe things and have concerns, it's always helpful to incorporate in what we do. And because our audits again are public, it's a way that we put it out there that you are concerned about. That's for the most part what I had. And I'm happy to answer questions about my office, about our mission, or about things that you would like to see happen.
First off, thank you so much for coming and being here and doing this part of the roadshow a little bit, but really appreciate it. Mr. Snyder and I will have an argument trying to discern if you're on the Arlington side of East Falls Church.
I've always been Arlington, but
Okay.
I'm very, very excited about everything that is happening in Falls Church City. It's my favorite place to go right now.
That is extraordinary diplomacy. I would also say that,
Here they got deals.
so just a big thank you for everything you said and addressing the big issues quite artfully, consistent with an extraordinary background. I appreciate you naming the word trauma. Perhaps that's a word that you may have experienced in your past, the legal piece, but that resonates as a possibility. So I'll just stop. Just a huge thank you. And are there questions that folks have? And open the floor, and you don't have to make one up if you don't have a question, but you are certainly welcome to. Mr. Alpha.
Yeah, thank you very much. Fantastic presentation. Being here and doing that, and I really appreciate your offer to come talk to us on your audit. And that might be something, we have a WMATA committee, that perhaps, we're pretty busy right now with some other things. But perhaps that could be something we could do.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much.
Any comments from either of you two? Sorry, let's Mr. Stork and then Mr. Karen Thomas.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate you being here and appreciate the overview you've given. I chair the audit committee on the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors. Jimmy's on there with me and a few others. We spent a lot of time, prior to Jimmy, we spent a lot of time interviewing to find someone and finding the right mix of persons. And as part of that process, we identified maybe more clearly what we wanted out of an auditor, because there's more the financial aspect or maybe the waste, fraud, and abuse aspect. There's also the performance auditing aspect, and in particular, we renamed really to make sure that the community as well as the board focused on it as a performance auditor as well. Do you have any sense? The recent report I saw had a lot of performance elements in it, which I was obviously pleased to see. But do you have any sense of how you intend or will look at approaching that?
So we have three parts of our audit team. We have the contracts, which is where we look at contracts before they are finalized at WMATA to see if before they sign the final contract, if they're getting a fair price. Which helps, I think, save WMATA money because our auditors are able to give an objective overview to that. Then we have an evaluations team, which will do quick hits, which I'm very excited about because I'm always coming in and saying, why haven't we looked at this? And that is where my evaluations team comes in. But then our largest part is our performance group. And that's what we put together in the plan. Those are all performance audits. And we are looking at all aspects. I'm not sure if I 100% could hear your question over here, but I think it was about our performance audits.
Just in general, what if you see going forward a particular ratio or objective that you have where 30%, 50%, some percentage of the focus of your office will be on these elements?
So
And the other thing is, I don't know the size of your group two, and I was smiling as I'm thinking to myself, as you go through the list, we have a total of like 3 people, and so it's a little bit different regardless.
So we have 20 in our audit group. And we have a particularly talented IT audit group. So they're very experienced. And that's not to say that my other people are not very talented too, but that is one section that is specialized. And then we have people doing the performance audits, which we have been there a while. And we are modeling ourselves after the strategic plan that WMATA has, so that we can check to see as they are moving forward with some of their more important items that we're there looking at and seeing how they're working. So when you look at our plan, you'll see that there's actually a parallelism between them. But that is the majority of our work, will be the performance audits.
Thank you.
Great, Mr. Karantonis. Thank you. Mr. Booth.
Mr. Chair, Supervisor Stork stole my thunder. I was also about to ask you about performance auditing. You know, we face here, and appreciating that you're here and that you are willing to share your journey and the proverbial performance of your office now. And because we have to answer these questions very often about and the better we are at answering them and showing that WMATA makes significant progress, the better we are off. This has been really very helpful every time that we show that WMATA is performing. So thank you. I have nothing else to go.
Thank you, Mr. Karantonis. Mr. Smedberg.
Yeah, I just want to say, you know, Michelle touched on a few things, but her experience, her professionalism, and her collaborative approach to things has made, again, a huge difference in a relatively short period of time. You know, the board has seen it in the reports and interactions we've had with Michelle in her office and with senior staff. And so we're really appreciative and look forward to many great things and getting communiques and reports that are, you know, well written and clear and proper grammar and punctuation and all that kind of good stuff. But it makes a big difference.
Yes.
Makes a huge difference.
We are about to issue the first performance audit report under me, should be coming out soon. It is on contract modifications. But it was held up till I became comfortable with the writing and understanding the audit. So it should come out very soon.
But what's most important is that staff is functioning at a high level so that in turn, again, in cooperation with the senior leadership, can really have an impact and make things better overall.
Thank you, Mr. Smedberg. And just, I particularly appreciate sort of the sensitivity to, we all have positions in our local governments that we really try to get right. And I have a ton of hope that, and also your acknowledgement that trying to keep some continuity is a component given what has happened. So a big thank you for recognizing that big issue and all the big issues. I think at one point when you were speaking, I thought this is as good as my second or third written draft of remarks. And I was just really appreciated. So a big thank you on behalf. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was gonna pile on, thank you. You know, I've been in organizations where auditing has been used in a very punitive way. And so like, tell the group they're gonna be audited, everybody's like, you know, and shut down, which is absolutely wrong way to get anything. So it really, I'm here. I don't know.
Thank you. We'll let you have your option to stay or you're certainly welcome to stay. You do not have to by any means. We respect those who are balancing lots of things and just are thrilled that you came and really appreciate it. So thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Sure. Now on to report from our WMATA board members. Go ahead.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start out with a few things and take over. Earlier this month, the WMATA board approved 2 agreements for more Metro bus service in the District of Columbia. Actions can continue the 24-hour bus service in DC and add additional bus service to compensate for the cancellation of the DC circulator service. DC is entirely funding services. The board received its fiscal year 24 service excellence report. The report, which you can see on the website, highlights increased ridership, reduction in crime, and reductions in fare evasion on Metro Rail.
Yep, a couple things to highlight. So we're closed the books on our previous fiscal year with a budget favorability of 28.4 million. That was, as you look at the totality of the year, we actually had lower than expected revenues on the passenger side. Not so much because ridership was lower, but the mix of ridership, I think you're all pretty well familiar at this point, that the long haul kind of rider is the one that hasn't really come back. Post pandemic, you don't get as many people coming, making long trips on Metro. So initially when these budget forecast projections were done quite some time ago now for this previous fiscal year, we were anticipating more of a standard normal mix as we recovered. And well, that's not how the recovery's been. It's been very, very steep in some parts of the region and not as steep in other parts. So that's part of that budget picture. However, we've outlined before up here significant cost savings that management has achieved through management actions, hiring freeze, vacancy savings, alternative paratransit options, things like that. So we've actually did end up to the positive, and that trend is continuing into this fiscal year, which is good news. I did mention previously the concept of fiscal reserve as a component that we would like to establish with this 28.4 million. Unfortunately, that is not currently on our agenda because of some concerns at the state level, starting in the state of Maryland, continuing a little bit to the Commonwealth. I think most people in this room that were familiar with the concept have been very comfortable with it, which is the simple fact that Metro is the only transit system of its size that doesn't have any kind of reserve of its own. And we maintain a long-term goal of being in a position where if we have relatively minor changes year to year, we would not have to go out and ask jurisdictions for more money. But under the current system where we're sort of expected to spend down to zero, that's difficult. Also, just from performance standpoints, if you incentivize your employees to save some money, it's helpful then to be able to kind of do something with it and save it. And then from a bonding standpoint, what's really one of the things really holding us back in our creditworthiness is the fact that we don't have an identified fiscal reserve like all of our governments do. That's something that comes up, and Paul and I are meeting with those agencies. And so we maintain that goal. The board actually has an existing policy to allow the general manager to establish it. We wanted to put forward a policy that really more formalizes it and makes it a board action. But as I said, we have received concerns from the state of Maryland and somewhat from the Commonwealth of Virginia on the executive side. And so we're going to continue to work through those and hopefully maybe eventually make some progress there as well. The other thing I will just highlight is that we completed the installation of our new fare gates in all of our Metro Rail stations. I'm sure you're familiar with those, the saloon style fare gates. But now that we've fully installed all those, fare evasion has dropped an amazing 82%. So that is money that was very well spent. We can get payback on the investment we're making there because of that. Obviously, that's not the only thing that changed. We also had some changes in the way that we were able to enforce fare evasion in the district, which has made a very big difference. But certainly, I think the atmosphere on the system, if you're out on the system, is really significantly improved without that level of fare evasion. We still have significant issues on bus on fare evasion that continue. It's much harder. You don't have that same point of entry type of standardized process. Metro has targeted teams at bus stops. We're doing a lot of turnarounds. So individuals, not necessarily showing up in statistics, but if somebody shows up at a bus, they're not paying, they're being asked either to pay or to leave, essentially. And so that's continuing. But if you look just simply at our numbers on fare evasion, they're very high on bus. They're approaching 70%. So we still have a lot of work to do there. But on rail, huge improvement. On the bus side, one of the things that was holding us back was that sometimes our own equipment wasn't working. And so we fixed that problem. We have 1,500 new fare boxes on all the buses in our fleet. So, and then finally, just mentioning that there'll be some minor track work in Virginia. And so portions of blue, orange, silver, yellow will have 15-minute headways this weekend. And then on blue, orange, and silver, we'll be replacing cross ties and insulators on the yellow line, stringers, fasteners, and rail hardware. But I don't know, Paul, did we mention the labor contract in the last? Okay, let me just, we should all talk about that for a second. So
Before you do that.
Yeah.
One last thing about service, during the holiday period between Christmas and New Year's, there's gonna be a major sort of shutdown of 3 stations.
Yeah.
3 stations downtown for major repair work. I mean, there's no other way to do this than to, you know, rip off the Band-Aid, so to speak. So just be aware of that. WMATA is pushing a lot of things out now to make people aware of that. It is, you know, by far the least ridership of any time of the year is that week. And, you know, some in the district early on were a little concerned about that, but, you know, we worked with a lot of people in groups, so we are, you know, moving ahead of that, you know, during.
So just quickly, I think we had kind of previewed that we were nearing agreement with our largest union, APU 689. We did formalize that agreement on both sides, ratified by the union and by the Metro Board. Those employees were very well compensated over the last several years. They had CPI built into their contracts. We had very high inflation, so they had significant salary increases. So they did agree to take a 0% increase this year. That is also shared among non-represented employees, including all of senior management. So nobody in Metro is getting a raise this year, given the fiscal situation that we were in. And then 3% in the subsequent years. There is a max of 5. If inflation returns and we get above 3 again on growth, it can go up another 2 points, but only to 5%. So we won't have another situation where we had 10% year over year growth in our budget, which was very, very difficult to manage obviously from a subsidy standpoint. So that was a major component of that. It reminded me on the hours of service because there were a lot of things internal to Metro that I won't get into details about. One of them was we had this thing called the work train, which went around and essentially distributed employees. And you wouldn't think something like that would be a big deal, but essentially it meant that there was a vehicle on our tracks, like an extra hour beyond service. And so what that does is then diminish the amount of time that you have for maintenance significantly. And so that's going to be no longer. We're making alternative arrangements for those employees. But there's a bunch of little things like that that are going to contribute to efficiency over time that you'll see in this contract. So just good news that we got there. We have been flagging it as a potential concern, you know, going back some time, but it's good to move forward.
Great, thank you. Questions? Commissioner Story.
Matt, did I hear you right? 70%?
Plus, yes. Lots of variance on lines and where that's occurring, but it's a very high rate. You know, if you go back and look during the pandemic, it was free because of concerns on health and safety. Some of our jurisdictions are free, so I think there is some element of passenger sort of confusion. And then just, you know, without the enforcement, we don't have our operators enforcing, you know, for obvious reasons, for safety reasons. And so, you know, multi-pronged approach, I mentioned, you know, teams that are sort of doing turnarounds. We also have actually police on certain bus lines at certain times that are very high fare evasion, reminding people to pay and ultimately taking action if they don't. But it's, you know, it's much harder to do that in a major way compared to rest.
And just so you know, Mr. Stewart, there were people who may have transit benefits that wanted to tap, but the equipment wasn't working or anything. So having the new fare boxes and the updated software and all that kind of good stuff, you know, those people who choose to, it's, you know, now can do it. So, you know, and there are a decent number of folks, particularly in the district on some of the lines who, you know, we would hear from and say, hey, you know, I want to tap, I can tap, and I can't. So, you know, there's that side of it too. Not as much, obviously, but still, there are a lot of people out there who want to tap.
In the general fare evasion, you said, I guess, it's up to 83% now. What is best practice? Is it, maybe the question I'm really asking is, what's best practice? What's the highest level in the industry of someone and what is medical staff information?
It's a good question because you do hit a point of diminishing returns. You know, you're paying for a lot of police to be out there. What we've always approached this issue holistically. It's not necessarily about fare evasion per se. It's about crime on the system. And as a general manager always says, you know, not everybody who fare evades is a criminal, but virtually every criminal fare evades. And so, you know, with the overall desire to try to reduce crime on the system, which is consequently, I didn't share the statistic, but is down 16% since we've been executing the fare evasion and the new fare gates. those two things work together. But I don't know that I have a specific number. I think, you know, Randy's and the team have talked about that issue, which is at a certain point, you know, you're not gonna be able to completely eradicate it. You know, it's not gonna be worth it to do that.
You all have you have an identified objective for that?
Well, our objective, our goal is to collect 100% of the fair that we should be, but we know, we don't have a number lower than that.
Yeah, there's always been fair gauge.
Yeah,
It's just, you know.
If you have a metric that says if we're above 95%, that's good. If we're below 95%, you need to keep working on it.
we don't because this has been a sea change very rapidly. And as much as we were hoping and projecting that the gate structure changes were gonna make a dramatic difference, I think it's exceeded what we were expecting, quite frankly, in this amount of time. So I think, you know, we only just got the last one installed about 3 weeks ago. So I think it will be worthwhile to have that discussion once we kind of normalize and we know physically what we're capable of, but
I'd urge you to have that, and I understand why you don't have it.
yeah.
Well, I do know we are doing better than.
Yes.
So it's plausible also that there may be over time some more detail that the general manager, in addition to what you guys might have. So let's go to Walter and then back to Mr. Karantonis and then Ms. Garber.
So yeah, just a couple things on that, I mentioned this, I think, to the group before. I subbed in for Matt at Randy Clark's first, WMATA board meeting.
Yeah, he did.
And that was his first board meeting. He told the board at that meeting, I already stopped installation of the old fair gates. He
Yes.
basically just stopped it because he saw this. He
Yeah.
saw how much difference,
Yeah.
you know, the new fair gates would make. So even before the first board meeting, he basically instituted that change, which was a big deal. And I would hope on the bus fair evasion, I would hope, you know, maybe you could find a way to align incentives or to create the right incentives to bring that number down. So I know it's a tough issue and there are a lot of.
Well, one thing I should mention, I didn't do in my report. So we're about to institute a new formula. You're all gonna hear about it, I think, probably next month. I'm briefing staff tomorrow on the details of that formula and how it changes for the jurisdictions. The top line here is, except for Loudoun County, nobody's changing dramatically. Loudoun's is gonna go up pretty significantly, which our staff is aware of and we were anticipating. But one component of that formula is you essentially are getting credit for paid ridership. So we're looking at a top line number, but then your overall subsidy is gonna decrease for the amount of revenue you're generating as part of paid ridership. And what that really is, to Walter's point, is an incentive to make sure your riders are paying. Because there is a cost for the system for those that aren't, and so that's going to be borne by those who, you know, frankly, the jurisdictions are not paying as much, so.
And one other thing, and this was something else that we discussed here, that the new labor contract is a big deal. It is a very big deal. And if folks remember, when Randy Clark was here, I don't know, a year or so ago, there was some discussion about the labor contract. He and his team obviously were the ones negotiating, it wasn't the board, you know, that was in the middle of that, consistent with collective bargaining procedures. But one of the things that was discussed here was the timing difference between basically Metro employees during those pandemic years and employees of our own local governments. Because we did go through that basically 0% salary increase, pay increase, you know, for a year. You know, we sort of went through that trauma in our own systems. And frankly, the way I'm seeing it, this is Metro readjusting and sort of, and I realize it's a big hit, you know, for employees or a lot of individual employees that are, you know, that are gonna be sacrificing because of this. But it is, I guess, readjusting some of the same sort of spending levels that we had in a lot of our local governments during the pandemic. So this is a really big deal.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah,
Mr. Smedberg.
And Walter, I'm glad you mentioned it because it is a really big deal. But I think what the board appreciated is that,
You know, the GM and the senior team came forward and had an idea of a plan. They executed on that plan and kept the board up to date and what was going on, as opposed to just sort of going along and then, oh, we'll just send it to arbitration, you know, and we know where that ends up. So, you know, it was a good approach, a new approach, and it really paid off for, for everyone.
Yeah.
The employees, the organization, you all, funding partners. I mean, it's a win all around.
Thank you. Mr. Karantonis.
Just adding to Mr. Osborne's comment, it's really very appreciated as well. It's across the journey consider. So one question on variation of buses. This is a problem that many bus systems have, especially when they have, the top. So does this raise questions about the implementation of multi-door boarding buses? Systems I know, the first thing that they did was to actually study why people are evading fare. It's very different than metro. Whether it's too expensive for them or otherwise. And then first, the line of defense was always a relatively massive campaign, sensibility for awareness of everybody else who's riding, so that there is some sort of social pressure there. Not that they have, suppressed variation significantly, but definitely about 70%. So I'm a little bit concerned about, because the multi-door boarding is a significant performance issue for, especially ridership rich routes.
It is plausible that there may be I don't know the answer to that question yet.
I mean, I'll put it this way, since we've been instituting multi-door boarding, I wouldn't say that bus fare evasion's gone up. I mean, in fact, been going down a little bit as we're doing more enforcement. Meaning that, not because of it, but I think it's not necessarily a factor in why it's occurring. I think it's a whole host of reasons. We've been trying to address the need-based customer through the Lyft program that we have, where you can qualify for a 50% discount if you receive benefits. And we just got a report on enrollment there, and I think there's definitely still some room to grow within the jurisdictions to get more folks part of that program, so that, if it's a needs-based issue for them. But I mean, quite frankly, a lot of it isn't, it's folks who just don't want to bother. So we certainly have, I think, stepped up the pressure, so to speak, but it's hard, I think there will be continued improvement. As I mentioned earlier, I don't think the numbers are entirely reflecting the totality of what's happening because of turnarounds that don't ever get recorded. But it's, the board is asking if, Randy always says, I'm the one asking about it almost every meeting, which is true. So, it's gonna have to be a focus for the management team, so.
Great, thank you. Mr. Garvey.
Yeah, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse here. Maybe this question is answered. So what's happening in other bus systems? I mean, it's got a big issue everywhere.
Absolutely, no, and then this plays into the broader discussion about fare free and all that.
Yeah.
It's gonna lead to a different discussion.
Yeah.
And I think.
Yeah, no, we're not unique.
I think people are gonna look at what the district is doing, and as we look at Better Bus. Look, there is, one thing, several of the routes, particularly in the district, it's above 100%. We're leading people 2-3 cycles.
He means capacity.
Capacity. Oh,
Ridership.
Ridership,
Not fare.
Yeah, sorry.
It's ridership.
I figured out, but I've given up already.
Sorry, ridership,
Yeah.
Okay,
Sure.
no, it's fascinating. We talked about it enough here tonight, but it's obviously a big issue. Thank you.
Well,
Congratulations on the Metro one. I mean, that's just changing the game.
on the rail, yeah. So just also a particular appreciation for you naming 70%. I think it sort of changed the conversation.
Yeah.
We don't want to drill it to death, but we do, as I was reading about tap, non-tap in the report, that was helpful, and just appreciate the work, and mindful that we have our WMATA committee coming up and not trying to stay close-ish to our schedule. Mr. Alcorn.
That's good. I'm going to say something about the WMATA committee and the legislative policy committee meeting, which happened on September. And we got a presentation from MSD staff on a number of items. We heard a summary of how operating budgets at peer transit agencies WMATA are funded and what type of dedicated funding revenue sources they have. And they all have dedicated revenue sources except for WMATA. And all peers examined by staff use the sales tax. So we heard from staff about how there's a lot of variation in sales tax rates, structures for the revenues, often with an intermediary organization playing a role in the funding. There's not obviously one size fits all solution, at least that's been identified. But staff's work offers a roadmap establishing new dedicated funding for all transit agencies in Virginia. And then we also received an update from MBTC staff on regional fare policy and technology. And there is a lot of success, a lot of achievement that we can build on as a region. And important to remember, every local bus operator in Northern Virginia that charges fares uses Smart Trip and matches WMATA's fares and transfer policies, creating a seamless customer experience. The next major step in fare policy and fare technology requires WMATA move to open payments, where customers can use options like contactless credit cards to pay their fare. And I'm happy to report on that the most recent WMATA board meeting, General Manager Clark announced they hope to have this type of open payment system in place by 2025. I'm not sure about when in 2025, but that'll be. And then lastly, the committee reviewed MBTC staff's proposed recommendations for the 2024 report on the performance and condition of WMATA. This year's recommendations mirror last year's recommendations, which call for WMATA to continue efforts in finding cost savings and for the region to find dedicated funding solutions. So now I'll turn it over to Executive Director Matthijs to talk more about all the different things that MBTC is doing on finding a long-term sustainable dedicated funding solution for transit.
Thank you.
Director Matthijs.
Thank you so much. So indeed, September was very busy, and actually even back into the summer, a number of different task forces, working groups, and studies that are very much focused on identifying some sustainable funding sources for WMATA as well as the rest of our transit operators. Most recent of these meetings were just a couple weeks ago. The DMV Moves Task Force met on September 23rd. We do have a number of MBTC commissioners who sit on that, Delegate Sickles, Mr. Smedberg, and Mr. DeFerranti. And then also the Virginia General Assembly's SJ28 Study Subcommittee, and which is sort of a deeper dive on Virginia issues, by Senator Evans and Delegate Sickles, Mr. Alcorn, Smedberg, and I'm also on it as well. So that actually met a little bit later that week on September 26th. The bigger picture with all of these activities are really critical developing sort of a regional solution, as well as one of the Virginia components of that solution. For WMATA, we do obviously a lot of conversation about WMATA, but all of our local transit systems, including VRE. I know that the Department of Rail and Public Transit has been doing some deeper dive issues into revenues on statewide revenues for statewide and all of our local transit systems. And I think there's some striking data in that space as well in terms of the gap between what's going to be available in state aid for our local transit systems as compared to the needs. So again, the DMV Moves activities, and I know we had a Clark Mercer here a couple months ago. That is DC, Maryland, Virginia. The SJ28, if you sort of think of this take as a special deep dive on Virginia, and that's one of the things that the MBTC staff and many of these commissioners are recognizing the need of the interplay between those two. There really is not a lot of space between those. They're actually very coordinated, whether the data that's being presented at DMV Moves, that is stuff that we're using. And likewise, the things that we're learning and sharing in SJ28 and the staff level work is getting up in the DMV. So I just want to assure you there's a lot of coordination that's going on in that space. I'm actually going to turn over to Senator Evan just to give an overview of the SJ28 subcommittee, and then following that, Alan's going to talk about the technical working group that's supporting that. So Senator Evan.
Thank you, Kate. Last week we had our second meeting of the joint subcommittee, and we received a number of presentations from, including from MBTC, PRTC, VRE, and WMATA to get a better understanding of their operating and capital needs over the next 10 years. All the agencies, of course, are facing fiscal challenges, but with differences in the scale and the timing of the need. The needs information provided by WMATA was the same information that was conveyed at the DMV Moves, showing coordination between our efforts. WMATA also talked about progress, as we heard from the report tonight, in reducing fare evasion on Metro Rail and ridership growth and management of expense growth. We also heard from MBTC staff on their peer funding research, as well as an overview of the Virginia 3% cap on WMATA's operating subsidy growth, something the technical working group is going to be looking at for us. And we also received a presentation from Deputy Secretary Michael Sargent on financial and performance trends for WMATA on the region's transit systems. For WMATA and the transit systems. Some of the information in the report relies on the currently available but soon to be updated data that's been reported to the federal transportation department. So the subcommittee had a robust discussion on how to appropriately contextualize that information and the fact that transit's in a new place post-pandemic, and we need to focus on how we're going to move forward. The next meeting of the subcommittee is going to be on October 17th here at MBTC's offices. And I want to thank Mr. Five, not just for chairing the working group, but we got really good presentations. There's a lot more information to come, but was really pleased with the quality of the presentations. And if you could provide us with an update on the technical working group.
All right, thank you, Chair Evan. For the compliments first, we have a great staff here that are continuously pulling all that information together and supporting all of you. So happy to the folks who got the qualities. So the technical working group, which is comprised of a number of staff level folks from across the region, had its first meeting. And literally 2 minutes into the meeting, we were having very thoughtful and very constructive feedback on a lot of different issues that we know we have to talk about for the next several months and years, actually. Some of the themes that emerged very quickly were the concerns about the cost of living in Northern Virginia, recent reports about population loss, the area's ability to compete with other regions. Basically, how do we reconcile these concerns with the discussion of how to fund transit and engage with the business community, as well as a very important element of any conversations we have about transit funding. We also had a theme that came up about making sure we don't take funding from our existing transportation partners. I know we all look back to 2018, some of the decisions that happened back then when we got capital dedicated funding, learning from that, and how do we make sure that as we move forward, that doesn't happen again. Transit and the overall travel patterns are very different post-pandemic. Several things have hit a little bit tonight talking about that, the ridership patterns, the long haul commuters versus the short haul, how bus return faster than rail. All those things are very different, and how do we tackle that, and how do we make sure that new world of transportation and transit actually is reflected in how we fund transit going forward. As we heard also, we talked a lot about what can we learn from our transit peers across the country. There's a lot of things we can do, but I think the more important lessons are what shouldn't we do. Folks have done things across the country and they're like, oh, maybe I would have done something different, and taking those lessons as we talk to them and apply that to our unique governance here within Virginia and within the greater DMV area. Understanding the complexity of transit, we've talked a lot about that here in this room. Funding in Northern Virginia and Virginia in general, it is complicated, but understanding the important role that the state plays in investment as well. That thing has always been there, our partnership with the state and making sure that we're all at the same table working closely with them to ensure we maintain that strategic partnership we have. And continuing to work with all of our regional partners to define what the needs are. I think Kate and Senator Evan have talked about that, the greater need of the DMV area, and then diving a little bit deeper into here in Virginia. So that was kind of the theme that emerged out of the first. This was a pretty dense topic, but a really good discussion. We had great partners there from across the jurisdictions and across all the different transit agencies, the business community, DRPTs there as well, and also a representative from ATU 689. So great conversation. Going forward, in a couple weeks, we're going to meet again to talk about, again, the topics we're always talking about, how we do funding, the potential funding sources. We've done a lot of work here at MBTC. There's an opportunity for us to look at some of the other potential revenue sources. You're going to be hearing about that over the next couple months, what the working group is going to be looking at, and diving into some of the new information that the state put out for TIS back next week that Kate referenced. Again, there's always new information coming out, and we're trying to make sure we share that in a way that we're staying up and being extremely relevant. As things are moving forward, we're going to keep working very closely with the staff at the DMV Moves and at Metro. Literally, I would say at least 3 or 4 times a week, we're sharing new data, sharing new information. They've been great partners getting stuff to us and we get things updated. All of your staff have been extremely helpful in making sure that we have the most up-to-date data, so we're able to keep them all up to date in real time and make sure that numbers we put out there are accurate and timely. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Delegate Sickles and Chair Dufresne for any comments on the DMV moves side.
Just for all those around the room who weren't in the SJ 28 or DMV moves, we're coming to questions. So just hold on. We'll get to Delegate Sickles and we will give a little color in addition.
Don't you have to get home tonight?
Lead on.
That last topic took a long time.
Sure, lead on. Thank you.
I'm glad Kate is keeping track of SJ 28 and DMV moves and how those coordinate with each other. DMV moves is theoretically on a much faster track and, you know, focused on immediately how to make transit across the region better and what it's gonna cost. A lot of details and opportunities to make transit better for the customer and meeting materials. And, you know, this commission is very involved in all those. We at our meeting, we spoke about funding, like we always do. There was an overview of the total capital and operating transit needs in the region, including WMATA, under a few different scenarios. The first scenario was an existing level of service and baseline of state of good repair needs, basically what we have today. The second scenario allows for additional state of good repair needs and limited service improvements. These scenarios create a potential FY 2028 total funding gap across the entire region that ranges from 645 to 835 million. It's a lot of money, and it's just to run our system well that we have now, basically. It's important to note that these scenarios assume additional subsidies provided in this last budget go around, keep going. And we worked very hard, had a little luck this year to secure additional state aid in the new 2-year budget. We cannot assume it's going to continue. Our delegation is committed to it, I could say, from Northern Virginia, but we live in a very diverse state. And finally, achieving dedicated funding for WMATA must be a partnership between the state and MBTC, as we all know. And it's a must to continue our growth. I think that I've been commenting on a comment earlier about the fund that was suggested to be created. Might have been bad timing we had a surplus at WMATA and they decided to make a rainy day fund out of it. And I think that is a really good idea that had not been socialized anywhere and probably came at a really bad time because of the $65 million of hard-earned general fund money we did for this fiscal year and 85 million coming for next year. There's also $500,000 to support SJ in the budget. And I know that the administration sent WMATA an operating agreement to how to for our funding that we just provided today. And I don't know how much back and forth there'll be on that initiative, but part of it is about how the $500,000 is going to be spent on basically digging hard into management practices in a different way. That's their idea anyway, in a different way than it's been looked at before. So it's going to be a quick study. It's not going to be a long study using the money that we provided, which is only $500,000 for hiring very expensive consultants. So that's in our immediate future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Delegate Sickles, and the three of you in that corner. We are so grateful for the two senators and you, Delegate Sickles, for all the work and our delegation. I'll just add a little bit. Delegate Sickles described the two funding scenarios and the amounts, and there was some discussion of the importance for our region strategically of being big and bold with respect to transportation, which would be a bit of a change, and that is sort of implicit in the second scenario. I'd say it was kind of notable. Chair McKay talked about the challenges that we have that in relying heavily on local revenues, and I think he alluded to property taxes as a huge source of our funding, and so that was a piece of the DMV moves discussion. And they'll be at that session. We're next gonna meet, I think it's November 4th or so, or November, maybe just after the election. Early November. But that was a piece of it. I think it's important just to note that unless there's a successful attempt to pull some of the money out that was put in the first of the two, in the last year's budget, Virginia has set aside money for 2 years. Maryland and DC have not officially done that, so they have to do that next year, next fiscal year. But the big picture, the same principles we sort of shared, and a couple of principles for funding. One size fits all approach to funding for the region doesn't work. We have very different systems. Maryland is all state funded, and we have a balance between state and localities. Virginia, Maryland, and DC should have their own solution, but they should include, as we've clearly discovered now, an inflation factor for the reality of discovering that on the capital front. And we've been making the case that we need to maintain that 50-50 partnership between Northern Virginia and the Commonwealth, and that's sort of further fuel for Mary Hines's comment that we need to follow up on. We have to also include the rebaselining that we worked so hard in the last legislative session. So NVTC staff have been everywhere. They've been keeping us updated. We appreciate the coordination and research. We've got more to do. I'll pause there, mindful of your comments, Delegate Sickles, that we do eventually want to get home, but if there are burning questions, I think it is important that we open up enough space that if anyone has questions about DMV moves or anything, feel free to ask them. You do not have to make up questions, and if I don't see your hand, we will move on to the legislature. Oh, yes, Commissioner Merriman, please do ask.
Okay. At the risk of being the skunk at the garden party.
Sure.
What the heck are we actually talking about? And what I mean by that is we've just had 15 minutes talking about a dedicated funding stream.
Sure.
And the many, many groups that have been meeting about dedicated funding streams. And no one has said anything about what that might look like.
Sure.
I heard early on that in other areas, it's a sales tax. So when we talk about sales tax, I heard that it can't be one size fits all. So it has to be different in Virginia from, say, Maryland or DC. But of course, we also know that in Virginia, Northern Virginia is totally different than the rest of Virginia when it comes to the transit opportunities here. Is it the localities that are implementing these funding stream? Is it something from the state? Like spell it out for me, or spell out some of the things that are on the table, because in the last 15 minutes, we didn't actually hear what was on the table. Am I wrong?
Sure. No, I think it's fair, and we can.
Hello, Nancy.
There, so.
Yeah,
So
let's start dancing.
Sure.
Or let's start dancing.
Well, there's at least I'll just speak from my perspective.
Right.
There are DMV move slides that describe the revenue that would come from the sales tax.
Okay.
And yet there is a different amount that results from a sales tax in Northern Virginia, DC, and Maryland. My understanding is that we provide, if we just did a 1 penny sales tax for each of the relevant jurisdictions, we would be providing perhaps arguably more than our share to fund the rail and I'm happy to be corrected. So that is the concern from the Virginia side on pure sales tax. There's some discussion, at least there's some, it's early stages, and I did try to be concrete saying, we've got 2 years of funding. So if we put our cards all on the table, now there may be some challenges where Maryland and DC have a year to figure it all out. It's also the case that I think pretty clearly we're all aware that a full funding solution from the Virginia side is unlikely to occur before 2026. And so the only other thing that I think I can say is that you could argue that the sales tax might create the amounts, but if Maryland doesn't have localities paying into the system,
Right.
so that might set the levels, but there might be some flexibility. There are 3 or 4 other funding sources. There's fuel tax that we're discussed in the DMV moves slides, fuel tax, recording tax, they are a fraction of what the sales tax would provide. And as my understanding is that most other localities that are large across the country, most have used the sales tax. So we're talking a little bit, some about the sales tax, but also trying to account for this lack of congruity in taxing entities. And we're talking perhaps additionally, maybe of some of the other items and I can't name all of the 4 other pieces, other than, fuels and recording tax. There are a couple of other recording tax. A property deed recording, when you record, there's an amount. I think there's 2 others that provide some level. So that's me trying to be as concrete as I can without being overly concrete, because there is this question of timing as to when we get concrete, if that makes sense.
Yeah, look, there's a lot of work going on. It's a very complex issue politically, financially, and coordinating between the 3, jurisdictions. I know there's people around this table and people sitting in the audience who are doing this, who deal with these kinds of issues on a daily basis that are really looking at this. The CAO group, particularly in the Northern Virginia side, and the district CFO are regularly meeting, and the representative from Maryland, one of the deputy secretaries there, are in constant communication. So there's a lot going on. And there were some examples, but they were simply just examples. There's a complex model that is being used to look at various scenarios and different things. Although nothing gets us to what we actually, what would politically and otherwise be practical, doesn't really cover all the costs. It does help create a dedicated stream, but it doesn't get us all the way, but at least, it would be something. So there's a lot going on right now. Your CAO is actually chairing the business group or the community group, I'm sorry. So, there's a lot of involvement with a lot of the key players. And of course, we have people around Senator Evans and Delegate Sickles, who ultimately the political people will at some point take over.
Delegate Sickles. Under the structure of these organizations, I don't think you're gonna be ever satisfied. I think you're gonna have to live in a little gray area for a while. And what I think we need, and I think the chairman mentioned this earlier, was deciding how much of Virginia share is, right? When we have Virginia share, we'll figure it out in Virginia how we pay Virginia share, period. And I personally, my personal opinion is I don't want it to land on the property owner's real estate tax bill. So that is a big concern of mine. And even though I'm not in local government, I'm very concerned about that. So it'll have to be, in my opinion, or we'll work towards something other than you having to end up paying the bill from the property tax. And maybe the state can continue to do more. But what we just did this year is pretty incredible. Thank you very much.
And it was pretty clear at the COG retreat that the district and other jurisdictions basically said no to property tax. They basically said, and just to, we might want to check, because I'm pretty sure the district came up with 2 or 3 years of anything.
And I think they've shown a plan.
Yeah.
They kind of put the sales tax on the table as well.
Yeah.
And so, to be clear, I was not asking for the answer tonight, but I think the point still stands. That starting to say some of the stuff that Chair DeFerranti said, sales tax, fuels tax, reporting tax, mix of them, sales tax gets us here. It's starting to have those conversations and get a little more concrete with it earlier is actually a good thing, because eventually, whatever we do, we have to sell to the public. And if you haven't noticed, I may be new to politics, but keeping it simple usually is the best way to sell it to the public.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you spoke up and there's a little bit of we have to sell it, be clear. We have to also sequence. There is, for November, the 2 scenarios, like we have to set there's a little bit of a need to say out loud, the need to be big and bold at the November meeting. because that comes and that sets the number, and then you can fill in. But, I think it's, I'm glad you mentioned, Mr. Alpine.
Yeah, and there's a couple more pieces that I think are important to note. First of all, the role that MVPC staff are playing in terms of pulling together the options and understanding, you know, if we did this, we would get that. That's super, super important. And those pieces are still coming together in different ways in Virginia. And so that is going to be sort of one part of the discussion once we get there. And the other piece, let's not forget, because the governor doesn't let us forget, is the discussion about cost control. So it's all tied together. And that's part of the, LAMATA committee discussion, the legislative committee, and obviously the moves in District 20.
I think the Deputy Secretary Sergeant brought that issue forward in both SJ 28 and DMV moves. But I would say that it might be beneficial to, and I owe my colleagues on Arlington board an update on DMV moves, and it might be useful to touch base with the chair. And because in my conversations with other colleagues of yours, there's been differing levels of sense of clarity on this balance. And I absolutely understand the property tax burden, and it's also the case that there are different ways of doing sales tax with respect to equity that may impact different members of your group. But yes.
And just one point of interest, Matt, myself, and the GM, Mr. Clark, we met with the governor 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago. We for about 2 hours, and we had a very, I thought was actually a pretty good discussion overall. So
yeah. So
yeah, and actually,
go ahead.
Really briefly on that point, the NTD data discussion did come up there, and I think just important to note from an efficiency metric standpoint, when you're looking at older data and we weren't running 2/3 of our fleet because they were grounded and you had a pandemic, guess what? The metrics don't look great, combined with the fact that Metro wasn't properly reporting them. So while those issues have been fixed with the reporting, then the reports that will come out next month look much different. We were able to present that to the governor. Don't want to speak for him, but I think he was very satisfied with the quality of that. I agree with Paul, it was very productive. He was extremely well prepared. He asked very good questions. We were there for almost 2 hours, and it was a good discussion.
Great, so we gotta keep.
It was a management team at Metro. The management team from
Chef
Metro.
Miller wasn't there?
He was.
Yeah, the
Thank you,
secretary.
just curious.
Yeah.
I think it's a good question. So thank you for asking, and good discussion. There's a lot more work to come, and we both need to update you generally as we did, but also have enough engagement so we really absorb what's actually happening in this. So thank you. We'll go now. Legislative and Policy Committee, I think Mr. Gide may not, I think Ms. Matisse, are you gonna give that?
It's just very high level, and again, this was a joint committee meeting with the LAMATA committee, but we did want to start having a conversation about our legislative agenda. And so in particular, I really, adding on to some of the conversations we had earlier today is the focus for this coming General Assembly session, very much on ensuring that we keep the funding commitments that were already provided by the state of the biennial budget, and very much a hold harmless approach. It is our anticipation as SJ 28 DMV moves forward, perhaps next year there will be big, bold funding requests, obviously led by our delegation. So at the state level, very much focusing on protecting and preserving and really not things too unlike what we've had last year. When it comes to the federal space, again, ensuring that nothing's happening in the federal space that would affect our locality's ability to be successful in getting discretionary funding grants. Our locality has actually been very successful in getting some of the FTA grants, so obviously making sure they continue to get fully funded, especially some of those programs that are very much subject to appropriations. One thing I do want to add is that there's now starting to be a look at the national level on a reauthorization of the protector law. I am acting on the legislative steering committee for the American Education. Those conversations are going to start up this fall. And so obviously there's a bigger conversation about even shoring up how we're paying for transportation in general. Because for those who've been tracking it, the federal transportation trust fund has really been borrowing from a whole bunch of different places for a very long time now. And so it's not how long that's gonna be sustainable. The other thing I do want to echo, we obviously have a lot of things here within NBTC, but just like I talked about APTA, the American Public Transportation Association, we also learn from our colleagues at the Virginia Transit Association. So when we develop our legislative agenda, there's often a lot of back and forth to sort of see what's going on in the rest of the state. And so I know we'll be continuing to coordinate with them. We will be bringing a draft back to this body in November for approval in December. So just sort of more to see in that space, but state sort of hold harmless. And quite frankly, at the federal level, hold harmless as well, make sure that our localities have the ability to do very well in the federal funding space. So that is what I have, but for one other thing, we do have our save the date now out there for our annual legislative forum, Friday, December 13th in Arlington, where we held it the last couple of years. Still developing the agenda, but my anticipation, it's gonna be a lot of conversation akin to what we just talked about this evening. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Other questions on legislative? To some degree, you know, there's a level of defense that we need for keeping what you'd asked me a year ago that we would have got. I would have said, I would have been stunned that we were there. So without questions, we'll go on to report on our program advisory committee and the joint commission working group. Ms. Palchik is unable to make it tonight, so we will hear from Mr. Fine.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. The Program Advisory Committee and the Joint Commission Working Group both met on September 19th. So I'm going to talk you through in a moment about two actions we have up for you tonight on the Commuter Choice Program. Before I go to that, the Program Advisory Committee met and talked through a lot of work that's going on in the zero emission bus space. So we had a lot of great questions and discussion that came from that, and a little bit of homework. Ann McGrain from our team has been a superstar leading that conversation here in Northern Virginia and with our colleagues in Metro and over in Maryland. So just a follow-up to do that we're gonna follow up on and keep you all informed on the work that's going on there. So jumping right into the two action items we have tonight. Next slide, please. It's a time I'm not going to go too much into the weeds about the program itself. I think folks are pretty familiar with the Commuter Choice Program at this point, but tonight we have two actions for you. One is to authorize the executive director to submit our annual report to the Commonwealth Transportation Board. We do that every year. It's required in the MOA we have with the Commonwealth. Make sure that all the money that we're investing, we take a look back. Make sure we're documenting what we've done with the money, how we've invested it, and the benefits that have accrued to the toll payers and to the Commonwealth at large. And the second item is opening the next call for projects. So every other year we cycle between 66 and 395 corridors. This we're coming up on 395. So opening the call for projects. And we've already been spending a lot of time working with all of your staffs to make sure that they're aware of what's coming up and the things that are requirements to change or evolve in the program. So moving on to the next slide. It's a quick snapshot of some of the benefits that we've accrued over time. Now, this looks really back in time. There's inside the packet of materials for tonight, a really good, colorful report about all the work that's been done by the Commuter Choice team, documenting what we've been able to benefit toll payers and folks that live along the corridor, greenhouse gas emission savings, fuel savings, time savings, all kinds of things in there, amount of money they save in different ways when it comes to owning a vehicle, crashes avoided. Safety is always an issue out there. So I can dive into lots of really, really good information in there. And I think FY24 was one of our best years when it comes to transit ridership. But we've been talking a lot about transit in general, some of those trends. We are seeing ridership steadily going up in a lot of different areas. Bus is one that's really recovered well. So we'll keep tracking that and moving forward. Next slide. And we also have a little bit of non-data, we have a little bit of storytelling in there as well, talking about the benefits of transit to the Commonwealth. We've had that conversation here about Metro and our transit systems. We dug a little bit deeper and looked at the program and this program and how transit benefits by this program and those direct benefits tying into that. The storytelling is really important to the Commonwealth Transportation Board. They are the primary recipient of this report. So telling us Northern Virginia's story, as Ms. Hines said earlier, telling that story to all the rest of the state and why transit up here is so important. Next slide. So as I talked about the next funding cycles for FY26 and 27, we're anticipating having about $25 to $30 million available for programming. May seem a little bit lower, but as you may remember for folks over here, last time around on the 395 corridor, we did make some pre-obligation commitments to Route 1 BRT for Fairfax County. So once you take that previous existing commitment off the top, we have about $25–30 million to work with this time around. There is likely to be very high demand, and on a 395 corridor, we generally are oversubscribed. So we've been working very closely with all of your staff to really think strategically about what are the projects you put forward, put the best projects forward, because it's going to be very tight money-wise, and the scoring will kind of bear out what we do. So the Joint Commission Working Group, again, which is made up of 3 people from MBTC and 3 from PRTC, we'll meet again in early spring to talk through what those options are for funding projects in a very, very constrained environment. Next slide. So that's a quick snapshot of where we are in the timeline. We're here if we get approval tonight, the call for projects will open tomorrow. The application is ready to go. Hopefully your staff are ready to go, ready to start putting stuff in. I'm sure they'll all be having conversations with all of your different boards and councils to make sure that they have authorization moving forward. Like I said, we will reconvene early in the spring to talk about what are those trade-offs we have to make with a limited amount of money available. So with that, try to keep it very brief. Go to the next slide. Those are the 2 actions, again, that staff are requesting from the commission tonight. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Pye. Can I have a motion for 7A and 7B to authorize the executive directors, 7A, to authorize the executive director to submit the FY 2024 commuter choice annual report to CTV and authorize the executive director to issue the I-395 commuter choice call for projects for FY 26-27.
Second.
Ms. Briscoe and Ms. Bagley. Any further discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion passes. We will now go to item, I believe it's item 8, Virginia Railway Express. Mr. Dalton is here, give the CEO report, and VRE Vice Chair Ms. Bagley will present the 4 VRE action items, which will be followed by a block vote on the 4 resolutions. Then we will have a presentation and discussion on the VPRA funding agreement. Mr. Dalton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, commission members. We'll be concise here, but we do have a few things to get through. So just initially, you do have the CEO report and other information items in your packet. So, and happy to answer any questions if anybody has any, but we can move right on, I guess, to the action items, because we do have a little bit of information for these items.
Sure, thank you. Always concise, but also focusing on the big picture of the 4 items. I think, Ms. Bagley, you were going to do a discussion of the 4 VRE action items, if I understand correctly, over to you.
Okay, well, I appreciate everybody sort of bearing with me. I'm going to try to push through all 4 of these, I think, so that we can then vote on them on a block. And I guess we'll do any discussion or at the end. Action 8B is to approve resolution 2540. This is the amended VRE Operations Board electronic participation policy. The VRE Operations Board recommends commission approval of resolution 2535, which will approve the VRE Operations Board electronic participation policy. Updates to the policy are necessary to reflect recent changes to the Virginia Code's Freedom of Information Act as a result of legislation passed in the 2024 General Assembly session and signed into law by the governor. The amended policy was approved by the VRE Operations Board, which must be followed by approval by NBTC and PRTC. VRE's policy is very similar to the NBTC electronic participation policy. Item 8C is to approve resolution 2541. Approve and authorize the VRE CEO to amend the lease agreement for parking at the VRE Broad Run Station. For action 8C, the VRE Operations Board recommends the commission approval of resolution 2541, which will authorize the VRE CEO to execute an amendment to the lease agreement with the Prince William County Board of Supervisors for real property use for parking at the VRE Broad Run Station to extend the lease agreement for 20 years at the cost of $1 per year. I believe Mr. Dalton has the cash. The current agreement will expire in October 2024, and this amendment to the lease agreement will extend the term for an additional 20 years through October 2044, with all other provisions of the agreement unchanged. Action item 8D is to approve resolution 2542, authorize the referral of the preliminary FY 2026 VRE operating and capital budgets to the participating and contributing jurisdictions. For item 8D, the VRE Operations Board recommends commission action to approve resolution 2542, which will authorize the VRE CEO to refer the preliminary FY 2026 VRE operating and capital budget to the jurisdictions for review and comment. Final balanced FY 2026 budget will be submitted in December for the Operations Board consideration and referral to the commissions for approval in January 2025. VRE Chief Financial Officer Mark Schofield is here tonight to give more details on the preliminary FY 26 VRE operating and capital budgets. I'll turn it over to Mark.
Oh. Thought we were gonna do one more of the items in the block. Great. Thank you. Good evening, commission members. Next slide, please. Since we've talked about the process, we can talk about the numbers. Our preliminary operating budget for next year is $117.7 million. That includes everything we need to operate, maintain, and pay the debt service on our rail cars. That number is actually down a little less than $1 million from the approved budget for this year. That's for two major reasons. One, this is the last year that we will be paying debt on our 11 cab cars, so that will be extinguished. And then, as we'll talk about a little bit later, changes that will be coming related to the access fees that we pay to operate on the Manassas line. Those will be lower by about $4 million or so compared to this year. So those two things together are what is bringing that number down. We have a preliminary capital budget to obligate approximately $73 million worth of different revenues, primarily including projected $44 million worth of FTA money that is flat to the current split letter that we have with WMATA. We will be doing a lot of work with the operations board over the next couple of months to refine both of those projections, and then we will bring, as was mentioned, the budget back to you for final approval in January. Next slide. The way I think about the budget is we have the big policy levers that we need to go to the operations board and the commissions to get your direction on. And then once you've given us those directions, it's up to us to deliver VRE in the most cost-effective way possible. So those big sort of policy levers, at least at the preliminary level in the budget, are no proposed increase in passenger fares in 26. Actually, we did have an increase in the current year, the first one that we had post-pandemic. We are proposing an 8% increase in the total jurisdiction contribution, so from 18.3 million to 8 million. Just to recap that, 18.3 million was where we were at in FY 21 prior to the pandemic. We were able to use our pandemic relief money to give relief to the jurisdictions. We've been bringing that number back up. So we are back to 18.3 million this year. We're again trying to get back onto the trend that we're at pre-pandemic. We are proposing to continue our current levels of weekday training and continuing to provide the necessary budget authority to operate the proposed Saturday trains. We have not yet initiated those trains this year. We're hoping to bring those on sometime at the beginning of the coming calendar year. The last item then is how much projected pandemic relief money we would use next year. That's not an explicit policy decision. That's kind of an implicit policy decision given everything else that we're doing. So we're projecting approximately $39 million worth of pandemic relief money in next year's budget. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, I should say. Our task now is to go through that budget, try to pare it down, try to see if there are things that we can defer, really try to focus our discretionary expenses on those items that will bring in more riders. That's where we really need to be concentrated. Okay. On the capital program, like I mentioned, we have the preliminary dollar amounts there. We do expect some significant work to be occurring in the next couple of months, not just on looking at the scopes and the schedules and the budgets of our projects that we have going on, but also how are things gonna change with midday storage? How are we gonna be using the FTA money? All of those things that are gonna be coming out of the Manassas line. Our planners have also been working on our long-range plan update, and we're gonna be trying to link our projects in the near and medium term to those goals, those long-term visions. So we'll be bringing that back to you as well. Next slide, please. As we always do, we like to update you on where we are with the pandemic money and the tranches that we have received. We've drawn all of our CARES money as of Q1 of FY23. We are about halfway through the rescue plan money, and we have not yet tapped into the CRISA money. Our projection is still approximately the middle of FY 2028 for all of those monies to be completed. And with that, I will turn it back to you, Zach.
Well, so those three items are all related to budget, and our sort of plan here was to just open it to see if there are any questions. Mr. Alcorn.
Yeah, thank you. Mark, thank you for making this so clear, as you always do. I really appreciate that. Will we be seeing a plan, given that the pandemic funds are running out in about 3.5 years, when will we see a plan for what we're going to do in terms of making up that deficit? Is it SJ 28? Is it going to be additional subsidies, fair revenue? But when are we going to see a plan?
Sure. I think we are working on that right now in the SJ 28 context. Okay. Absolutely. And, I'm a member of the working group. We've been talking about how do our projections match up with Connector and OmniRide and Metro and all of the different providers. We're all in the same boat, just at different kind of times in the boat. That doesn't make sense. Sorry. On the same train. There we go.
Same track. Different line.
I think, you talked about the jurisdictional contribution, you talked about the passengers. I mean, I think we're always trying to balance that issue with the passengers of, we have a number of passengers who get the transit benefit. We don't want to leave that money on the table. And yet we also want to look at, are there changes we can make to the passenger fares to bring in new markets? So that's always a balancing act that we're trying to make. And then with the jurisdictions, on the one hand, I think jurisdictions are able to leverage a relatively modest investment relative to the size of VRE to get what they get. At the same time, if we're going to do if we're going to continue our existing train and hopefully add trains and use the capacity that's going to be there, we're not going to do that on the backs of the jurisdictions. And we've had that discussion in the SJ 28 context.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions that sort of doing the math, 67 minus 39, where that leaves you? I would say, I don't know where the full process on SJ 28 is, but we probably need to see a plan within 1 year from today. Maybe way ahead of that, but no other questions on the budget? I appreciate that was an important one to ask, Mr. Alcorn. So we'll do it in a block, but I just wanted to give that chance because the three preceding budget, the next one, Ms. Beck.
Item 8E is to approve resolution 2543 to authorize the VRE CEO to execute an operating access agreement with the Norfolk Southern Railway for track access and dispatching. For action 8E, the Operations Board recommends the Commission authorize the VRE CEO to execute an operating access agreement with Norfolk Southern Railway for track access and dispatching. VRE currently has an operating access agreement with Norfolk Southern related to VRE operations on the Manassas line. The original 1989 agreement has had many amendments and extensions over the years. VRE and Norfolk Southern staff have been in discussion since the latest agreement in 2023 to negotiate a long-term agreement. The current extension expires on October 10, 2024. The new agreement is for a term of 20 years, which will expire in 2044, with opportunity to renew upon prior notification to Norfolk Southern. The Virginia Passenger Rail Authority recently purchased approximately 24 miles of the Manassas line corridor from Norfolk Southern. VRE will continue to operate on segments of the corridor retained by Norfolk Southern, in addition to the segments purchased by VPRA. Norfolk Southern will also provide dispatching for VRE trains. That is the item.
Thank you. Is there anything that you wanted to add, Mr. Dalton, on this item? It sounds like the specific areas that Norfolk Southern aren't too impacted by the broader issues that we'll take up in AF. Is there anything?
If I may, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just kind of going back to a point that Mark made previously, just to give you some context here. Our in our latest fiscal year 24, our operating access fees were about $4.8 million. That's actually what we paid out, okay? I will say publicly, within those negotiations and stuff that we're having, those operating access fees were projected to more than double, okay? So those were some of the decision points that we were working with. With this agreement, in addition to the 20-year term, we'll be paying a flat fee of $750,000 a year for the access to the NS retained portion of the line and dispatching fees, with an opportunity as a couple other potential transactions happen to actually reduce that 750,000 flat rate per year even further. So I just want to make that point. That's why partly you see at the beginning of the preliminary FY26 budget, partly why you see it actually go down from the previous year, as Mark mentioned. So just wanted to put an exclamation point on that. So
That's very helpful for those of us who may not have read every page of the 2543 and the pages that follow. It also puts a little, just for those who want to know substantively what we're looking at in this block vote. So with that, unless there are questions, I'll move to, I'll ask for a motion on the following resolutions to approve resolution 2540, which is the amended VRE Operations Board electronic participation policy. Resolution 2541 approved and authorize the VRE CEO to amend the lease agreement for parking at the VRE Broad Run Station. Approved resolution 2542, the referral of the preliminary 2026 VRE operating and capital budgets to the participating and contributing jurisdictions. And resolution 2543 to authorize the VRE CEO to execute an operating access agreement with the Norfolk Southern Railway for track access dispatching. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Mr. Stork, seconded by Ms. Bagley. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Well, thank you, Mr. Aguirre. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. Now we're on to item 8F. We have Mr. Dalton, Mr. Schofield here to give a presentation on the proposed the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority funding agreement, which will require subsequent action by the commission at a later date. A copy of the proposed agreement on this presentation was provided in the meeting materials. And I believe it is now over to you, Mr. Dalton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, let me, just a tad bit more table setting here with just, what you have in your packet is a draft agreement. Wanted to give the commissions an opportunity to see that. We're going to highlight basically not the draft agreement is a very broad agreement that we're working with. We wanted to highlight, actually try to bring back to our, kind of pick up from our July discussion and sort of hone in a little bit more here on funding sources and how we are going to propose to recommend what that, funding commitment, if you will, to VPRA. So we've got in your packet, I believe, there's an information item from the operations board, a little bit more extensive presentation. So we've got the highlighted slides here that I'll say next slide. Mark will jump in. I'll jump back in when needed as well. But glad to take questions as we go along here as well. So just with that, thank you. So in terms of sort of explaining how VRE is going to participate in this transformational deal, what you have in the packet there again is that draft agreement between VRE and VPRA that really is kind of an umbrella that lays out how much are we committing over what time period, and not how must we do it, but how can we do it. And I think that's important because we're going to be coming back to you, in a couple of months, asking for your iteration on the agreement, but then we're going to be coming back to you multiple times in the coming years, coming back to you with specific purchase agreements for each of the property interests that we are talking about buying here, and that's what's shown here on this slide. We have had some very positive initial discussions with the FTA about the ability to use FTA money in this transaction. And we are now sort of pursuing that along kind of two parallel tracks. One, I would say, is kind of a legal track, looking at the appraisals, looking at the purchase agreement. And then one is kind of an environmental NEPA track, making sure that we're checking off all the boxes there prior to doing anything. But again, we anticipate having this umbrella, and then underneath that, individual purchase agreements for the yard, the broadband corridor, the easement for the platforms, and then the commuter rail operating fees. Given the preliminary appraisal work that we've had done to date, we believe that the total of all those appraised values will exceed the amount that we committed to DPRA. So next, well, and then also, not just are we going to be coming back to you with these agreements, but we're going to have to come back as a part of the budget process each year and explain how are we making, you know, this year's contribution to DPRA, because that's not going to be specifically laid out in the umbrella. All that is saying is, here's how you might do it. And every year as a part of the budget, we're going to tell you, here's how we are. Next slide, please. So even if all of those property interests do end up being eligible to use the FTA money on, and I don't necessarily agree with it, we're hoping that would be the case. We still couldn't use 100% FTA money on it. We would need to provide the local match of at least 20%. So you're talking about $30-ish million at a minimum. So then the question is, well, where is that coming from? We have a number of potential sources that we're looking at listed here. One, of course, is reprogramming existing money that we have on our midday storage project over to our new midday project. We have the potential to reprogram existing commuter rail operating capital money that is currently programmed towards other projects or towards our commitment to TRV. Again, if we can bring in other money behind that. We also have money that VPRA has committed to us over a medium-term period for reimbursement of the access fees. Could we potentially reprogram that and bring other money to the table, bring that VPRA money to this transaction? And then, as we've talked about previously, we do want to consider the possibility of also bringing new money to this. I think, you know, the near-term one that we're looking at is the Highway program, and then maybe down the road, bringing new revenue that comes out of SJ 28, but that's a little more speculative. Next slide, please. I think it's really important to emphasize that this purchase is not just a good deal in terms of giving DRE and the Commonwealth control over this line. It is not just a good deal in terms of having a much better capital project in terms of where we're going to store our midday trains in Alexandria as opposed to in DC and the proposed New York Avenue location. But that midday storage is also going to be much cheaper on operate. And so what we have here is a sort of rough order of magnitude calculation of kind of the 10-year operating cost of going from, as Rich mentioned, had this deal not been done, north of $10 million a year in access to NS to $750,000 and dropping per year. And then the reduced costs of the actual operation of the midday storage location. As at a gross cost level over 10 years, you're talking a difference of almost $180 million. And then even after you account for the fact that VRE does get reimbursed on access fees from VPRA, just for VRE as an organization, you're still looking at over $110 million difference over the course of the 10 years. It is, I think across all dimensions, it is a very, very compelling transaction. Next slide, please. Rich, do you want to talk about
Yeah,
that?
sure. Just want to leave you with, before we get any questions or anything, just again, next steps. That list starts to dwindle there a little bit. Of course, today we're finalizing the long-term operating access agreement with Norfolk Southern. We are, as just stated, finalizing the funding agreement with the VPRA. We do need to finalize a long-term operating access agreement with VPRA. And I just wanted to just make the point here, we're seeing, you know, there with that agreement, will settle on, and we mentioned this previous presentations, we should be able to settle on. There's still likely to be a contribution from VRE for some direct maintenance costs along the line. So I just wanted to, that's still something that we need to flush out. And then as Mark mentioned, let's see. No, I think that's about it. Yeah. So the funding agreement, and then just want to make a point there at the bottom. It's not, we're looking at several funding sources. One of the things I want to emphasize here too is on the operating side, we want to, we want to be mindful of the fact that obviously to take advantage of the capacity enhancements. How are we gonna go out near term, long term, if you will, and fund the operating expenses as well. So we have a mixed bag of things going on. So again, those are our next steps.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Gold and Mr. Schofield. I appreciate the reference to the discussion in July. I think that's probably helpful. I hope commissioners are all sort of aware and thinking back to that session. As a reminder, this will come back to us for action at a future meeting, but it is part of the important transparency and public process that we need to have. So I don't see big hesitations for going on to number 11. Mr. Trogdon, I believe, is still online, and that's number 11. Lest we do appreciate you guys coming and making the presentation on both items. So yes, Mr. Snyder.
Sure. Thanks very much. I mean, one of the things that I'm excited about is, and I recall being at the WNOD bike path, and I guess trains were running on that along there until what, in the 1960s, I've heard. So it's really exciting that we're retrofitting Virginia to have a really comprehensive rail system that will serve all of Virginia, the ability to go from one place in the Commonwealth to the other without relying on a car to do that. So I think in your presentation, I'm saying, how does this piece fit into that larger context? And to me, that's really exciting here, and how your funding and your plans fit into the larger overall effort of developing Amtrak and DPR and all the rest of it. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that forward. You're not talking anymore about sort of running just a commuter rail system back and forth to DC, that there's something much larger that you're really part of.
And I think that can get people really excited. So just a thought, as a request for the future.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. Also, I think there's a couple of conversations that have happened in the last few months that have sort of shown sensitivity to the various factors involved. And there'll be more work, but I'm glad you mentioned that, certainly. And thanks again for the presentation and your ongoing work, Mr. Dalton and Mr. Schofield. So we will now go on to item 11, which is the DRPT Director, Zach Brogdon, to give the monthly DRPT report. I confess to Mr. Brogdon, I've not always been clear in asking for your vote, because there are some instances where we've had someone who's technically doing your vote, but still grateful for your report if you were there.
Can you all hear me? Somebody give me a thumbs up, maybe.
Yeah.
Very good. I don't have a lot from what we've talked about. We're certainly just DRPT staff are engaged in SJ 28, DMV moves, the transit funding group, and so we're just working very closely with all the MBT staff there, and of course we just had some good news from some work going on with VPRA. From the VRE folks, so a lot of good things. I guess I just mentioned one thing is that there's an effort called RM3P that's going on in that area that is also picking up some steam. It has to do with some dynamic incentivization for people to figure out other ways to take multimodal trips, and so that's something that perhaps we can all have a presentation on at some point in the future too. But thank you, and great to see everyone, and that's it. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Brevity is the soul of wit, but also appreciate you staying with us and providing that update on that last item, and we'll make a note of it. That's item 11. Item 12 is Kate for the executive director report. I'm trying to listen to you, Ms. Delegate Sickles, and be efficient. Ms.
I gotta
I'll do my
be, gotta be at
best.
home in 12 minutes.
My wife, oh, go ahead.
First of all, I want to thank I think most of the folks here around the table were able to be a part of our 60th anniversary event. It was really a fantastic event. A huge shout out to the staff. It was about 18 months in the planning. The documentary that was premiered there is now online. I know several of folks have actually put it into their constituent emails. We've actually got an incredible amount of praise from others, and we're actually working with Georgia Mason University. They have a whole transportation archive to archive a whole bunch of stuff, including the interviews that we've done. So thank you to everybody on all the work on and helping us celebrate our 60th anniversary. As I mentioned, I just came from the American Public Transportation Association's annual meeting. I had a chance to moderate a session on multimodal corridors and was also very involved in a lot of legislative conversations. So more to come in that space. Everybody loves canceling meetings. So I think the first thing I can announce, there was some talk about having an October legislative and WMATA joint committee meeting. As of just moments ago, I got the confirmation we are not going to be holding that. So everybody has found, other things to do, I will say, on October 17th. We do plan on having a November joint meeting that will likely be all virtual, as I look to Alan to confirm that. Our next commission meeting will be November 7th. We will have our executive committee ahead of time at 6 o'clock. And then I mentioned our legislative forum on December 13th. We do have a brand new transit fellow joining us, Mira Armanos. Going to do a little Myrna, hi. So Myrna has just joined us a little bit earlier, just a couple of weeks ago, and she's actually helping us with all of our WMATA, SJ28, and great analytical work. She just actually finished her master's in urban and regional planning just in December, and she's diving right into things. We love our fellow program. Thank you, DRPT, for supporting it. And finally, I do want to recognize Sophie Spiliotopoulos, who's sitting back there and did not know I was going to be saying this, or maybe she did. But she and one of our former fellows, Rachel Inman, just got their first journal article approved for publication. If you recall, we did some work on identifying bus stops and basically getting an assessment of the level of bus stops throughout the region. And they've actually just had that article approved for publication in the Journal of Urban Planning and Development. So kudos, Sophie and Rachel, on that. That's a message from Dr. Hermany on all this. He's getting our staff in general very much into the academic space, providing some great stuff. Our financial reports are included in materials, and that concludes my report in 4 minutes.
All right. Thank you. Welcome, Ms. Armanos, and congratulations, Ms. Spiliotopoulos. My last name is DeFranti, so I did know that I was going to get both the pronunciations correct. Commissioners have any questions or comments for the executive director report? I think it is worth saying, as folks work through their phones and all that they've got, the 60th anniversary was a pretty special moment to attend and to be part of. You each have contributed to that, so grateful for that. Comments or questions? Without objection, I will try to get home in 8 minutes. I adjourn the meeting. Thanks, everyone. Stay on.